Stories and lessons from people whose lives changed in a heartbeat when catastrophe struck. This is Crisis in the First Person. Here's our host, Howard Price.
And thank you so much, Andy Field. Thanks to you, wherever you're watching, for checking out the first installment of our occasional series of podcasts we call Crisis in the First Person. These are stories and lessons from the front lines of catastrophe, from the people who survived them and are going to share their stories with us. And today's installment, Tales from the Eye of the Storm, lessons from Hurricane Helene and later, of course, Hurricane Milton as well. And we're privileged to welcome to our inaugural podcast my friend and colleague, Erika Andresen, who's coming to us today from her home base in Asheville, North Carolina, which was hard hit by the storm as it made its way inland after making landfall in Florida. A bit about Erika. She wrote the book on business continuity. No, really. She's written a best-selling tome on the subject called How Not to Kill Your Business. She's a guest lecturer at MIT, a veteran, and a lawyer who served as a major in the Army's Judge Advocate General Corps in Afghanistan. She brings unique expertise to small business when it comes to business continuity because she runs a small business dedicated to that mission. She's an acknowledged expert in risk assessment and continuity planning and teaches in the Graduate Emergency Management Program at the University of Texas at El Paso. And she's a true Renaissance woman, Erika. It's great to have you with us, and thanks for taking the time under what I know are very, very trying circumstances right now. Before we begin our conversation, I'd like to direct viewers to the ticker that you're going to see running at the bottom of the screen. These are just a few of the many organizations to which you can donate badly needed funds to support the recovery effort in North Carolina and elsewhere. To our audio-only listeners, simply Google Hurricane Helene and donate, or Hurricane Milton and donate, and you'll find any number of options for assisting in the recovery effort. And of course, I hope you'll give generously. So, first and foremost, Erika, how are you? Not as a business continuity pro, but as a resident of Asheville who's recovering from what I'm sure is one of the most personally harrowing experiences of your life.
Stressful and overwhelming and tiring. And I hadn't realized how much I was running on pure adrenaline, even though I was prepared. And even though I thought I was fine. But the first opportunity I had to relax, that's when I pretty much physically crashed, when things were safer, things I had to worry about less. And then just trying to catch up with the work I had to do that was due, but I couldn't get it done, was very, very stressful. And then the work I had to do the week I was trying to do it, and then also the new work coming in just because of my experience with Helene. It's, I find that I didn't really have the mental bandwidth to do anything at first. And that's something that, when people who survive any type of disaster are going to have a mental health impact. And even the strongest of the people who have been in austere environments, like my time in Afghanistan, I still, even here in the United States, just had a moment where I just really couldn't do anything after everything was better. And then part of me feels guilty because my neighborhood, I got power back, and there's still at this point 26,000 people in Asheville with Duke Energy who don't have power. I feel angry and frustrated at the county and the city for things that they didn't do that they should have done. And I'm trying very hard to make my services available to help restore businesses, not just for the next 1 or 2 months, 3 to 5 years. And it's not getting much traction. So I'm very frustrated that my local people don't understand just how important this is, even after they've been hit. So there's a whole lot going on.
And, that is going to have a lot to do with the back half of our discussion. We're going to talk a lot about the continuing struggle, it seems, to get business continuity and resilience as a top of mind issue, even after a disaster such as this. Let's go back to the beginning if we can. You're originally from the New York City borough of Staten Island, a proud fellow New Yorker. What brought you to Asheville, and more importantly, what was life in Asheville like before Helene?
So I joined the military when I was 31, and that's when I moved out of New York City. So I was a lifelong New Yorker till I was 31, and then moved all around. And when I was in active duty, when I got off of active duty, it was COVID. And then I moved around a lot after COVID, even though my intention of leaving active duty was to not move anymore. But the universe is like, no, 8 more times in 2 years. So here you go. And I was living in El Paso at the time, which is how I wound up teaching at the university there with my then boyfriend, who was stationed at Fort Bliss. And then due to circumstance, I wound up in Asheville and thought that, I might as well make this my home for a little bit, because if the Vanderbilts could come to Asheville and be billionaires, so can I, especially since they got their start in Staten Island, like me. And before that, I would say Asheville is a very tourist-centric city. There are tourists here in the summertime. There are tourists here in the fall because it's leaf peeping season. And when people would come to visit, I loved taking them to a lot of the businesses that actually got ravaged by Helene and the flooding. So there was really a lot of good stuff going on here. You could go hiking. Hiking's now closed because the Blue Ridge Parkway sustained some damage. Plus, they're like, we're trying to get homes back and people back and roads back. We don't have time to go through the trails and fix those because they're clearly damaged as well. There's just a lot of beauty in the area, and it's not that it's not beautiful anymore. It's just going through a hard time right now.
So, for those in the audience who's never been to Asheville, describe the place, the nature, the character, the culture, if you will, of Asheville, and what surprised you in the aftermath of the storm about its impacts there? What about its location or topography that lent itself to the kind of generational flooding that it experienced just a few weeks ago?
Definitely a very, like I said, fun place that tourists would come to. We have a big beer culture. They call it Beer City because we have a lot of breweries. Even the local college here has a brewery program. And it'll suit any flavor. There is a very laid back feel to Asheville. There's kind of a joke, like if you're coming here, you're going to be a Reiki master or some kind of something with crystals. So it has a bit of a woo-woo slant, if you will, but that's just one aspect of it. There's a lot of really fun culture because it mixes outdoorness with everything as well. So there's a lot of people who do bike riding. We have a lot of trails, not even just the hiking trails, but like walking trails in places. But the thing with the storm, like what surprised me about the impact, is certain places routinely flood because of the river from rain and whatnot, but to the level and to the degree, like they've gotten past it a couple of times, but just nobody was expecting. I'm not quite sure why, because I was aware of how bad it was going to be, but nobody was expecting it to be this bad. And even though I knew, and I would stand there surveying the flooding even before it hit the cresting stage of the river, that I was like, it's going to get twice this height. And even then I was like, this is pretty bad. And it seemed, even with my own eyes, how just unfathomable how much worse it was going to get, because it did get worse. And I think what made it, so we had a precursor weather event that was completely unrelated to Helene. It was just bad luck. So I think it started on Tuesday or Wednesday, I can't remember at this point, but it pretty much rained heavily the full 18 hours before Helene hit. And then Helene came with like 2 inches of rain per hour on Friday morning. And the ground had already been saturated. And people were confused. They're like, well, why are you saying it's not even reached its flood stage? It's not even raining anymore. And I said, okay, here's the thing. We are around 2,000 feet above sea level. The Blue Ridge Mountains in our area, the highest peak is over 6,000 feet. I said, all of that water is coming down to us. And we have 2 rivers in Asheville, the Swananoa River and the French Broad River, that both originate kind of high, and we're kind of a catch basin. So when you have both of those rivers flooding with all of that water coming down, and all that water is coming down because of how much saturation the ground had received before, and there was nowhere else for the water to go. So that kind of lent to just how bad this was.
Erika, tell me a little bit about your personal preparation for this kind of an event. You basically saw all the warning signs, and certainly given your level of public engagement and your education and all the rest, not to mention all of your experience with these kinds of crises, you knew what was likely to be coming. So tell me about the personal preparation. As an Army veteran who served in a combat theater, you're certainly uniquely equipped with many skills that are critical in catastrophe. So tell us a little bit about the days leading up to the storm and what you personally were doing to prepare.
So I started thinking about preparing on Monday or Tuesday. Because they projected the path that far out. They said it's probably going to. And then of course, as the week went on, it was more defined and more definitive. Like, this is what's going to happen. So I had already started preparing on Wednesday morning. So 2 full days before Helene hit, even before we had our rain event, because I was like, I want to do this stuff when it's not raining. So the first thing I did was move a whole bunch of my indoor stuff outside, because living in El Paso, I know how bad the windstorms can get, and things blow and become projectiles from the wind. So I'm like, all right, I'm moving all my Halloween decorations in. I'm taking in all my furniture from outside and putting it inside. And then I started thinking about, okay, what do I need to do? Kind of what I do when I consult with people. I say, take away something and see how you would operate without it. So I'm like, all right, I don't have power. Then I actually looked in every single corner and addressed everything in my house. I was like, all right, TV, I don't need TV. I'm fine with that. I'm like, what do I have here? Okay, refrigerator, it's going to lose power. So let me see what I have in there that's going to spoil quickest, because I don't want to have to open my refrigerator. And I'll pull that out on Thursday night and put it in a cooler, like I was camping with ice, because I was also taking all the ice out of the ice bin in my freezer, because if the electricity goes off and it's off for days, then that ice is going to leak all over the place. So I dumped all that ice in the cooler I had for camping, and I put all the food that I knew was going to expire first, and I was planning out to eat that. I'm also very conscious. I'm like extra on this. I wasn't just looking for food. I'm like, oh, I need protein. So I had Greek yogurt. I had oatmeal, which I only needed water to make. I also filled up a couple of gallons of water, not because I had gallon containers. It's just a vessel. So I was like, okay, what do I have? I have a couple of Nalgene's. I have some thermoses. I have Tupperware. I have a kettle for water. So anything that I could put water in that I knew I had a big enough supply for, I would use. And I knew, like, I also had protein drinks. So I could make overnight oats that had protein in it for the morning, and they didn't even require me to use any water at all. So I was kind of planning out a menu in my head as well. And I also filled up my tub with water, which has a surprisingly large amount of gallon available to it for flushing, because I knew we were going to lose water. And then I said, okay, if we're losing power, what else am I losing? I'm like, I'm going to lose my access to the internet. So let me pull off everything online that I need to access to do some work, because at least I have some backup power on my laptop to do some work. I looked around I'm like, all right, cool. I want my car in the garage. The garage is electric. The power's out. I won't be able to get my garage out. My car out of the garage. So I figured out how to disconnect my garage door from the track so I can get my car out without power being on. But I also had to figure out a way to reattach it, because I wouldn't be able to without power. But I couldn't. So I figured out a system to jerry-rig it where you could not open my garage at all unless you were inside the house. So that was just some of the things I did. And I was just mentally prepared. I had candles ready. I had flashlight ready. I was pretty good.
Had you thought at all about evacuating yourself from the area before the weather rolled in? And if not, why not?
I did not. I made a conscious decision not to, because I had consulted my neighbors about, has this street ever flooded? Because the way my street is, it's at the bottom of a couple of hills, but it's on the top of a hill. So it's like they dug down the road downward, and then, a couple of roads, and then my road's at the bottom. So I'm like, I know some water accumulates toward one part of my block, but not the other. And we have a creek running behind my house. And I said, has it ever flooded? They go, yeah, a couple of years ago, it got to about halfway to your, decorative grass. And I went, okay. And because my house is on a slant, back down to the creek, I knew even if there was like another 10 feet, it would at best get to my deck, but I don't have a basement, and the foundation is high. So I felt pretty comfortable that it wouldn't be a problem.
Did you sense any panic? Did your neighbors appreciate the forecast potential of this storm? Or did you get a sense of denial on the part of people in the community that, well, we're going to get a lot of rain and there'll be some flooding, but, no one could have ever imagined the extent of the devastation that happened. Did you get any of that sense?
From my neighbors, no, not at all. They were not panicked at all. I went to the gym Thursday morning and I said, so are you closing early tonight? They go, nope, we're closing normal time. We'll be here tomorrow morning. I'm like, no, you won't. They're like, yeah, no, we're not closed tomorrow. I go, you will be. And I also thought it was really, what is the word I want to say? Capricious, I guess. That's not the right word, but it gets close. Capricious of the gym owners to have the gym open because it entices people to go out on the road and drive and go somewhere. They should have closed. They should have advertised and they were closing the day before. And that just proves how much people weren't considering this. And even after everything happened and all the power lines were down, and so the sun was out by like 11:30, 12 o'clock, and people were walking around just looking. And I was like, we're losing water. Did you get any water? They're like, no. Oh, that might be a good idea. And I was like, okay, well, you should have done this yesterday, but you should definitely at least fill up your tub with water to flush because we're not going to have water. We lost water that night. And, one of my neighbors was like, oh, it's not so bad. It's only going to be 2 inches of rain here and there. And I was like, you have no idea what that means. You don't understand what cubic inches means. You don't understand what ground saturation means. When the first flood I ever worked in the military, it was a state of emergency for Missouri. They had 2 inches of rain every night for like 5 nights straight. And that caused horrible flooding. This was going to be 2 inches of rain over 2 hours straight, 2 inches per every hour for 2 hours straight. After it already rained like 18 inches from the precursor event. And I was like, this is going to be awful. Like, you have to understand. I try to tell everybody and they're like, oh, okay. Oh, look at that. And there's one picture I took when I went to go survey the flooding. I was just, doing some personal recon. Some fool went into the water, which was murky as anything because of all this stuff. He tried to swim across to get to the other side. And then he's sitting on a pile of like debris in the middle, catching his breath or something, waiting to go to the other side. And so I was like, I feel bad for him. I'm like, I don't. He's an idiot. Right? Like, why would you do that? There's no excuse for that. Like the people just didn't appreciate, number one, what had happened, and number two, the danger that they were about to be in. And it's kind of frustrating having the knowledge that people like you and I have, because we can see this and we're like, why aren't you doing anything? Why don't you see this as the danger it actually is? And then when I saw people the next day, I was like, oh, did you fill up your bath? No, I waited too long and there was no more water at that point. It's like,
well, this is a good time. We're going to do it several times during this podcast. A good time for me to hawk Erika's book. This is the book, How Not to Kill Your Business, Grow Your Business in Any Environment, Navigate Volatility, and Successfully Recover When Things Go Wrong. It is available on Amazon. And if you also are listening to this podcast and suddenly an epiphany hits you and you recognize the importance of business continuity and resilience, you can contact Erika directly at info@eaasc.com. That's info@eaasc.com. One more time, eaasc.com. And you see the book on your screen. It's available at Amazon. You will definitely want to go and get it and read it cover to cover before the next storm hits. And I guarantee you that after reading it, you will want to contact Erika and engage her fine services and have her get you on the path toward resilience. So, Erika, perhaps in no previous disaster event has there been so much misinformation and disinformation that has muddled efforts, critical communications between officials and those affected by the storm. Do you think that there's a general mistrust these days, a skepticism now about any information that comes from official sources like the National Weather Service, FEMA, emergency managers, local officials, the military, the National Guard, and what can we do, if anything, to stop it?
So I know there is a lot of mistrust because I hear the stories about mistrust, and then certain things I did not believe. First, I've heard people say they didn't tell us it would be more than 10 feet of flood. And I was like, who are you asking and who are you relying on? Because I knew, and I was looking at the resources that are publicly available and for free for anybody to look at who aren't weather nerds like me. And I was like, they were promoting this. I actually fact checked myself. I went back and looked at the text messages I was sending to my friend here in Asheville. When I said it's going to be bad, it's going to be worse than they're predicting from 2004. I sent her that text at 4:29 p.m. on Wednesday before the storm. So, and her parents live near the RAD up on a high area that I was like, you need to make sure that they're able to get out because it's going to be that bad. And I knew that on Wednesday. And again, I'm not part of a secret society. So some information is there, but it's not coming from the right people. And I want to say, like, I really because I know what to listen for, I was listening to the briefings that they were doing twice a day. They were doing them at 11 and 4 p.m. just to let us know what was going on that you could listen to on the radio. And I could hear that they didn't know what they were talking about. I was like, you're not telling us everything. Because my experience, when they say, oh, we have so much water damage, we started the procurement process, which to me said, oh, I know how long that takes. That's going to be weeks before any real substantive work gets done because of how long that is. And then you have somebody from Duke Energy trying to be positive, and I don't know if this is the right tack to take. I'd rather have honest information than optimistic information. So the first day he's like, oh, we did so great last night. We already got 40,000 people back on in just 24 hours. We have 100,000 left. So in his mind in that moment, he's saying it's going to be like another 2 days before everybody's back on power. And I went, that's not true because I have eyeballs. I see where all the lines are down and the trees are down. And it's not just like a tree, like trees knock down complete telephone poles and light poles and wires were everywhere. And I had never seen or even heard of a Duke Energy truck being anywhere near my neighborhood. They didn't come to my neighborhood for over a week later. So it's like, all right. And then the next day, of course, they revised it to say, okay, by Friday, which was 2 Fridays ago. Like I said, today, there's still people without power. And, there should be a mistrust at some point. They just need to be honest. They need to understand that telling the information needs to be as accurate as possible because you don't want to give people inaccurate information. You don't want to give them no information. But I think one of the things that they did that was great in a more recent briefing, they had the water guy from the water department on. And he was showing, and I was watching it on Facebook because I actually had power and internet back at that point. And he was showing pictures. And he said, okay, this was September 30th. This is October 3rd. He was showing the extent of the devastation so people could really understand why it was taking so long and why it was going to take long. But then when he showed what the picture looked like on October 3rd, it showed how much progress they make because they aren't working in 8-hour shifts and going home till the next day. They're doing this 24/7 as best as they can with whatever material they have on hand that they can do anything with. Then I, hear people asking me, people who I love asking me, oh, is it true that, they're not letting helicopters in? I'm like, no, helicopters are flying around all day long overhead for days. Oh, is it true that they're trying to do a land grab for, the courts? And I was like, no, that's not what they're doing. This is not a thing. And then I read today that FEMA in Rutherfordton, North Carolina, they had to move because there was a credible threat. The Army National Guard came across 2 trucks with an armed militia saying they're coming to hunt FEMA. So it's insane how much bad information is being put out there. Like these people's lives are being put at risk and they're trying to help us. And there are people who are turning down help from FEMA for no good reason other than they're being told to not trust FEMA.
Well, and again, this goes back to what I had asked earlier about disinformation and misinformation. Are we now at an inflection point in American society where, for lack of a better way of putting it, people can't take yes for an answer?
Well, you're asking a recovering lawyer about yes for an answer because I'll always say the answer, there is no such thing as a yes and no. It depends. I think the specific timing of the election being at this point like a month away, and less than a month away, when it first started happening, I think people have jumped on that as an opportunity to spread some misinformation and to make it a campaigning issue. I can't understand. I mean, they want to talk, people want to have theories about these red states were hit, right? But North Carolina was being touted as a toss-up state, and Asheville is one of the bluest parts of North Carolina. So I don't really know what the point is of trying to politicize it that much. I'm like, just let the people do their work. And if you want to be really honest, FEMA gets their funding from Congress, and certain color administrations consistently underfund DHS for FEMA, and it's not blue, it's red. So I'm absolutely not about the politics of this. I am not. I'm about people getting the help they need. I'm about people surviving and getting through this. And I don't think politics has a place in this, because it is preventing people from either hearing, because some people at that point, when I started talking about blue and red, might have just switched me off and aren't going to listen to me anymore. And that's where the danger lies. When you start politicizing it, people stop listening to what's actually true, because it doesn't matter, because you're all of a sudden you're the other. And that's not the right place to be. And I haven't found any, like, my neighbors aren't doing anything about like, well, I'm Trump and you're Harris or whatever. Like, so I'm not interested in listening to what you have to say or partnering with you or trying to help you. That's not at all what the situation is for the people who are suffering. It's other people who are hearing about things who aren't actually here, who are trying to just make it more difficult for everybody here.
So, Erika, we're talking again about communications here, and the criticality of communications, not just the quality and the qualitative nature of the communications, but the modalities, the way of getting the message out. And it's bad enough when you're without power, but it's worse still, I think, when your community is isolated by blocked or destroyed roads, rising floodwaters, and you are without any way to communicate with the outside world. Wireless and wireline services down. There's no internet. Power is iffy. There's no connection at all with the world, basically outside your front door. So how do you cope and even begin the recovery process? Do you think that communications may be the weakest link here?
So there's a couple of questions in there. I think the weakest link was the broad inexperience with actual disasters that the city and the emergency managers had here. They didn't do a lot of things in preparation that they should have done. They did not provide the firefighters with any sort of water or food, even though they made them stay here for and not get off shift for 5-6 days straight. So they didn't have any water or food. That's something that should have been taken care of. They did not order evacuation for the flooding areas until after they flooded. And for some people, it was too late because their apartment buildings were flooded. The bottom floor was completely flooded, so they needed to be rescued. So they already caused there to be more danger than there needed to be, just because like that was an extreme weak link. But what was good as far as the communication is, I got my communication from both word of mouth and the radio. So people were like, we realized we had no cell service. So part of us were walking around, and then all of a sudden we get a ping, like, oh my God, we got a bar. Do you have bars too? Like, yeah. Or you'd be walking and you see people holding their hand with their cell phone up, and you're like, quick, let's go over there. They might have service over there. It was really odd that was happening that way. And also when you found it, all of a sudden, like it would just be like 5 people, and all of a sudden 30 people are there, and they're telling everybody else like, hey, come here. So the word of mouth spread really, really quickly. And then when the stuff that came from the radio is the only information we were getting. So all of my assessments I made about what was going on, what was happening, how things were going to progress was based off of basically if I were looking through a tube of toilet paper, like that little hole is what I could see. And from what I could see, it was pretty bad. But then when I left Asheville for a few days to escape for a pre-planned trip that was only a 4-hour drive away, I got to see a much broader view, and it was far worse than I thought it was. So I thought it was going to take months. It's going to take like a year, I think, for things to get something back to normal.
Erika, you've given me a great way to dovetail into the next question, which is the role of one of our oldest communications technologies, good old over-the-air radio, and the role that specifically it played in this disaster. We're in an environment now where the media industry, what's called the legacy media industry, which includes analog television and analog terrestrial radio, are going through tremendous economic contractions right now. Staffing is nowhere near where it used to be just a few years ago. And then you have a disaster that overtakes a community like this. And really, these legacy sources can become not only the only way of getting the message out, but a source authority for information that people need to know. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with radio during this disaster.
Radio was the only way anybody was hearing anything. So I knew the first source I could go to before I even knew the radio was going to be a thing. I went to my fire department, which is about a quarter-ish mile away from my house, somewhere between a quarter and a half mile. And I went to them and I said to my neighbor, if anybody's going to know anything about what's going on in the recovery efforts, it's going to be the fire department because they're on a radio comms where they can talk to each other. So I went up and we started asking, and I noticed they had a whiteboard they had put up that they were updating with information. So on this whiteboard, they had things like, this road is open, this one gas station is open, but cash only. So it had really valuable information to be put up there. And then one of the things that at the bottom was these two radio stations, 88.1 and 107.9, at 4 p.m., water distribution information would be given out. So when I went to go walk to the McDonald's that had some service allegedly rumored to have, other people were there. They're telling everybody, hey, this is the radio station. You got to listen to this radio station. I'm like, okay. So my neighbor and I sat in her car together because we didn't want to waste the gas of two cars. And I was charging my phone and she was charging her phone at the same time in the car. And we were listening to the stuff. And we both gasped at a certain point when they said, Chimney Rock is gone. And we were just like, what do you mean it's gone? The whole entire city is gone. And it is. It was completely wiped out. And that was like jarring to hear that, to know it was so much worse beyond here. And then the next morning I went walking I think I might have been walking up to McDonald's again. I was like, there's nothing to do other than walk because there was no power, no cell phone. So I was walking and I looked down the block and I saw a bunch of my neighbors standing around in a circle. And one I had met the day before because the first time I could meet people. And I thought they were maybe having like a service or something. So because it was a Saturday or Sunday morning, I can't remember at this point. And when I came back and I saw her, the one in the circle, I said, oh, I saw you earlier. I was going to say hi, but I assumed you were having a service. She goes, no, we were standing around listening to the radio because one of us had a radio. And it's kind of crazy just how that was just, never mind a linchpin that put the information in our hand and held our community together and gave us information about where we're going to get stuff, where the possibilities are, what are the, just what's going on in the other areas around us, because it wasn't just Asheville listening. It was Weaverville, it was Black Mountain, it was Swannanoa, and just knowing how bad it was in every single one. It also gave us perspective. And like I said, there's a guilt thing that we all kind of felt. It's like, oh, I mean, we're bad, but they're so much worse. And, we couldn't see anything. And, the fact that they didn't send a media van here in advance to have this information up to everybody else, it was just weird that it was this only one way we could get any kind of information for days, for complete days straight.
So you eventually did leave Asheville as you awaited restoration of power and your internet connectivity. What were you feeling when you made that decision, and what did you find when you got back to your own house and neighborhood, having had a respite to kind of reassess and recover mentally a little bit, to get supplies that you needed? When you got back, what was going through your mind at that point?
So when I said the trip I had planned over a month earlier was to go to Charleston, South Carolina, which is a 4-hour drive away. And at first I thought I was going to have to cancel it. But then they said, hey, because we were blocked off in roads, like the major roads in and out of Asheville were closed, like through flooding, through landslide, through just the road not existing anymore. And then they opened up one Saturday evening. They got one clear. It was 26 east, which goes south into South Carolina. But there were still issues along 26. So I was like, well, I can get out. And, I'm pretty okay. I might cancel because I kind of had it as a badge of honor that me and one of my neighbors were the only people who were staying. Everybody else was, boogieing out and leaving because they had places to go. They just didn't want to be in a place without water and power and cell phone service or internet. But I was like, that's all right. It's okay. And on the day before, like they're like, my family was like, try to leave early. And I was like, it's fine. I'll stay. It's not that big of a deal. Plus, I wound up volunteering with World Central Kitchen the day before I was leaving anyway, which was just an amazing experience. But the night before I left, my sister's like, you deserve to leave. You deserve to have a shower. You deserve to flush a toilet when you use it. Like, you deserve all these things. Go. And I was like, you're right. I do. And I left. And as I was driving away down 26, I saw all the stuff coming up 26. I saw trucks with trailers that had generators on it. I saw mass convoys, multiple of them, of ambulances coming up. And I was like, wow, the cavalry is showing up. Like, they're coming to help us. And that was really nice to see. And then when I got to Charleston, I took a shower and then I started doing a media binge. I wanted to see all the stuff I hadn't seen. Plus, I needed to update LinkedIn and send out some emails for my business stuff. And I was like, okay, you're going to just like do a tourist thing today. And then when you get back tonight, you're going to do some work. Well, within an hour of not doing work anymore and having taken a shower, I wanted to pass out because I was just so tired all of a sudden. And that's because I was able to relax. And I wound up not being able to do any work at all. I just didn't have the bandwidth. And I was getting ready to come back, but the power hadn't been turned on yet. So I was going to extend, and then I have a friend who lives in Columbia, South Carolina, which is closer to Asheville on my way back, who was like, hey, I'm leaving for 10 days. You're welcome to use my house and the power, water, great internet, whatever you want. And I was like, well, I did want to go food shopping too, to bring food back because everybody was in line. My food was going to have to get thrown out because it had been days. And everybody here was online for food, stretching down the block. I'm like, I don't want to take from the resources in Asheville that are scarce for the people here. So let me get it from the outside. So I decided to stay. I stayed 2 nights actually at my friend's because I was like, you know what? I was going to go back the next day. I kept saying I wanted to go back. I wanted to go back because I felt like I had to be back. But then the other part of me is like, you know what? You want to be able to go to a coffee shop and get a matcha tea. You want to be able to go see a movie. You want something that resembles normal. And that was so jarring for me to actually, when I was in Charleston, to, see everybody operating normally because nothing happened to them. And I even had dinner when I was in Charleston. One of the board of directors from the Disaster Recovery Institute, we had dinner together, and he's like, Erika, where would you like us to donate to? Because we do want to donate, and you're a local, and you're one of us. So, like, what's your suggestion? So we talked about that. So I felt pretty good on my way back. And then when I got back into town, it was Sunday morning. It was weird because of how different things were. I noticed a lot of progress. I noticed less lines at the gas stations than when I had left. I noticed hardly any lines or cars in the parking lot of the supermarkets. But I also noticed nobody was on the street anymore. And I was like, okay, did everybody leave? Or are they just home because the power's back on? So all of that wonderful neighborhoody feeling where everybody's being friends and talking to each other because we didn't have anything else to do suddenly stopped. And it was like, that's interesting. That's an interesting thing.
So, do you get the sense that people have learned anything from this? I know that you and I have talked offline about your efforts to engage with the Small Business Administration, with the local chambers of commerce, and the various agencies that are trying to reassemble the economy of Asheville, the business community especially. Tell me about some of those interactions and your sense of whether people are getting this yet in terms of business continuity and resilience planning and exercising plans to make sure that they can actually work at this level of disaster, resourcing them appropriately, taking into account human factors. You talked a little bit about the fire department and about the first responders who've basically been working around the clock here. You've spoken about your own mental exhaustion just as a survivor of this. So tell me a little bit about your experience in getting those messages across and your surprise at how difficult that challenge has been.
Right. So it's difficult because we've talked about this. So some of my neighbors, I'll talk first to like personal resilience. So one of my neighbors bought during Amazon Prime Day a generator, and apparently everybody she works with bought one too. So it's helping people prepare because they lived through it, which would make you think that business owners would want to do the same thing. And they're saying like, oh, we want to do resilience, but they don't really get what business continuity is. And when I show up to talk about it, and it's like, hey, I know it's a hard sell before disaster, but one of my things I say all the time is it's never too late to learn what you wish you knew earlier, because it could help you for the next time. And it's my goal that people have a next time, not that they get hit again. Another disaster is going to happen to this scale. I hope not, but something else is going to happen that they need to be prepared for. So I'd hate for them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, get a new fresh start, and not be prepared again. So when I reached out to the local council, I reached out to the mayor, I reached out to the county. The mayor responded, but she's clearly overwhelmed, is my assessment of her response, because it wasn't the response I was expecting. She basically told me to show up to a media event that the SBA was hosting. And I was like, that's not what I'm trying to do here. And then I got pushed to the Chamber of Commerce. And the Chamber of Commerce, after I explained what my expertise was, they went, oh, okay, we'll put your name on a vendor list. And I went, no, that's not good enough, because I live here. This is my expertise. This is what I'm going to do. I said, as a chamber, you're trying to help businesses get back. This is not a 2 to 3 month thing. This is a 3 to 5 year plan. And there are a lot of things you can do to make sure that when the businesses are back in Asheville, that they are going to be resilient and sustain something in the future, because there's a lot of things that weren't done. And I said, and I gave him a little salvo, the guy I was talking to. I said, look, you need to create mini chambers, because the solution that you think you're going to have for all the business doesn't apply to them, because Biltmore Village experienced very different things and has very different types of businesses than downtown Asheville does, as does the RAD, as does the places along the Swananoa River. They all need their own chamber to address their very specific needs. So that's one of the things you need to be doing. And he's like, okay, I'll put you to the CEO. And then the CEO's response was, are you doing this to get paid, or are you donating your time? And would not engage me at all beyond that. And I was like, well, here's my answer. I didn't come to sign a contract. Ideally, I'd like to get paid, but it's not ideal times. I will donate my services because this is my community and I care. And eventually, once I prove my value, we can move to a both model where I'm both donating and I also get paid something, because I need to eat too. But there's things we need to figure out, and there's ways I can lead you forward to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And I have a lot of ideas, concrete ideas that I know that they messed up. And I never got a response. And it's like, oh, I don't understand how it is so hard to tell people, you have this expert who knows exactly what to do to move forward, who has experience in the military, who has experience in emergency management and business continuity, and you're not accepting of it. And I think it's because they really don't understand what it is, or they think it's too late. But I have, I have one client in Asheville, and I've had one client in Asheville for a while, and it's the Carolina Small Business Development Fund. And they've asked me to do videos on business continuity, risk management, all these kind of things. And they reached out to me on Tuesday of last week, or Monday. I can't remember if it was Monday or Tuesday, but it was really quick. They go, can you make us a video on small business disaster aid? And we need it quick. And I went, sure, I'll do that, because they're like, you're the person that we know who can do this. And I finished it last week. And before we even started, I got a text, it's already up to help people. And I was like, at least that's helpful. At least they see that there's something. But I had to talk to my friend. I'm like, how do I present this information? Because I'm going to talk about this, the grant from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation and FedEx, where their mission is to make sure the businesses are resilient, small businesses are resilient. If you register with them with a business continuity plan in advance, they even give you a template on how to do a business continuity plan, and a disaster strikes your area, they will proactively reach out to you and give you $5,000 to recover free and clear of FEMA. And I talked about this in one of my other classes for them. And I'm like, how do I mention this without sounding like I told you so? And she's like, just to say, hey, remember here, if you did this, this is the time you do this now. And if you didn't, just know for next time that you can do this. And I was like, okay, well, that's a better way than I told you so, because that was a hard thing I was having a personal frustration with. And that was a weakness on my part. I will freely admit that I was taking it personally, that I'm like, you weren't listening to me, and I was trying to help you, and I could have helped you, but I can't concentrate on that. We have to move forward and fix what's ahead of us.
So, Erika, let me also ask you this question, because as we're recording this on October 14th of 2024, another major hurricane, Milton, has wrought havoc on the west coast of Florida. It's the latest in a string of strong storms to batter Florida, and these storms have come just this season alone. So the question is, what thoughts cross your mind in terms of climate, public awareness, preparedness, the frequency and intensity of these storms? Is there a message that you're able to effectively communicate? Are people going to start getting this?
Unfortunately, I don't think so. That's my opinion based on a couple of things. So first, when it comes to climate change and frequency and intensity, all of the measures that are implemented to fix things are done at current and historical data. They're not looking forward saying, okay, we're going to fix this. So even with the Asheville water infrastructure that was completely destroyed, in 2004, the pipes got wiped away from 10 feet of flooding. So they expected it to happen again. So they fixed it to make it happen. Like they fixed it to about 10 feet, a little bit better levels. So they were already expecting for this one, the first set of pipes to go. They weren't expecting the second pipes to go. And the picture that they showed, you could see the pipe below the ground. And they said, we didn't dig that up. The earth was moved that much from the force of the water that was flooding. So that's the first thing. Like we're doing a little, we're just doing little fixes. Like we could do a little bit worse than we did. No, plan for a lot worse for the next time. So it actually is resilient. The other thing is people have short-term memories. Absolutely do, except for the people who live there and who have suffered through it. Everybody else has short-term memories, because that's one thing I experienced in September 11th, where it was our front page news, 20 pages deep for months. And it became everybody else's, it was their front page news for like a week or two for 10 pages. And then it became like 3 pages. And then it became a paragraph, like 20 pages. They just stopped talking about it. It didn't impact them the way it impacts the people who suffered through it. And that's one of the things, it's out of sight, out of mind. And also, it's not in my sphere. So we talk about Dunbar's number, and you can only really care about a certain aspect or a certain amount of people. And I think Dunbar's number, it's either 175 or 250. It doesn't matter for the point I'm trying to make. You can only really truly care about that amount of things and people in your life. And if it's somebody who's living in Idaho, they're not going to care. So they're not going to prepare. They're like, oh, I think I heard about that. Because there are people who across this United States who adore me, who are only now being like, oh, wait, something happened in Asheville. So, I don't think so. And I even said today that the first month of the fiscal year for the government has just started. And they've already blown through almost all their FEMA budget just from the last 2 weeks.
So at the end of the day, you thinking of moving somewhere else, or Nashville's going to be home for you for a while?
Asheville was never my intended forever home. I only wanted to live here for 3 to 5 years. And I'm now about almost getting to 2.5 years. So I think because of what happened, I'm stuck here for at least 5 years because my real estate value isn't going to be very great when there's nothing else around. So until the city completely bounces back, I can't leave.
That's really, that really raises a great point, because I think that that's true for most of the people living in Asheville. They're going to have to put up with this struggle to restore and fully recover just their basic services. As you point out, reopening road systems, getting the water system back. 3 of the 4 water plants were hopelessly disabled, not to mention the distribution infrastructure. The power infrastructure is still fragile. Internet is still fragile. Supply lines are still very much stretched and strained. So this is really going to be quite a challenge for the folks living in and around Asheville for quite a while. So that brings to mind really the ultimate question, which is on both the individual and the community levels, what are the lessons we've learned from these kinds of catastrophic events? In terms of government and disaster response agencies and organizations, are they as prepared as they needed to be? What went right? Because I'm sure there were things that did go right, and what things went wrong and need improvement.
I think the big problems were the combination of inexperience and overwhelm. So, like I said, I was prepared for there to be no power, no water for like 4 or 5 days. And it's gone on a lot. I mean, I have both. I kind of have water back, sort of. They took from another line, as long as we're not wasteful of it and detract from the usage of the other people, then they'll let us keep using that water until our water line gets good again. But it's just running water. It's not potable water. So at least I don't have to worry about flushing and I can shower. But I don't think so. Actually, when I had a flight in New York for the weekend for a very quick job, and I was sitting next to an incident management team member from New York, because I know part of the FEMA package was sending a team from New York down to Asheville. And I'm like, hey, you want to talk shop? And he's like, sure. And I said, what do you think they were doing right? Because I didn't see much. I didn't see that they're on a very steep learning curve. And I'm like, to me, they were really inexperienced and made a lot of mistakes that are like, how did you make that mistake? And he sat for a second. He didn't say anything. He goes, well, I will say, I think that they were unprepared for how overwhelmed they're going to be. I go, so I was right. They're just inexperienced. He's like, they never went through a disaster like this. And they didn't expect to have to be working 24/7 for days on end to try to fix it. I said, yeah, but can you explain to me why they didn't evacuate anybody? And he goes, I can't. I said, can you explain to me why they didn't do this? He's like, I can't. So, it's unfortunate that they're learning on the fly when there's people's lives and safety and stuff on at risk. But that's what they were doing. I thought it was good that they at least were having and got the information out about the briefings, because again, we were in an information vacuum. So being able to do that was really good. When they realized how much they messed up, and they needed to make alternative means to do things like get us water, because they put our spare water in Swannanoa, which is surrounded by the Swannanoa River. And Swannanoa was one of the towns that was completely devastated, more so than Asheville. That wasn't very smart. I hate to kick people when they're down, but I don't want to say good job, especially when there was so much suffering that was caused as a result.
So we've only got about 5 minutes or so less, Erika. And as a closing argument for any business owner or organization official, government official, for investing in a business continuity and comprehensive resilience program, where does it start? Does it start with the reality that you think about this as an investment, as insurance, rather than as an expense or preparation for something that is costly and might never be put into effect? How do you make the argument to see this basically as an extension of one's personal or professional insurance policy, if you will?
So I like to talk about the cost of inaction, and I now have concrete data to give them to say, Manna Food Bank, for one, a nonprofit, they did a very smart thing. I saw it because they moved their trucks from their warehouse headquarters, which is right next to the Swananoa River on Swananoa River Road, and they moved it to a much higher elevation in the gym parking lot that I am a member of. And I was like, that's so brilliant. I hope to God they put all their non-perishable food items in that truck. And I found out yesterday, because I was trying to research, and there was an article from this weekend in the Mountain Express. They lost all their food because they just moved the trucks empty, basically. And I'm like, why wouldn't you assume that you would move stuff out of the way? You'd move the trucks to safety, but not the food. That's a valuable resource they don't have. And they lost all of that because the flooding was well over their building. And that is an example of, you think you're taking steps and you think you're doing something good, but there's always something more you can be doing that's going to help you even better than you could even imagine if you just have somebody go, hey, did you consider this? Hey, why aren't you doing this? And it's like, oh, because I get paid to think about these things. I also do it for my hobby because I love it. I'm actually passionate about this kind of stuff. They're too busy to think about this stuff. And it is an insurance policy. And even if you don't see it operating, right away, you inherently have more security and safety. That's what I try to tell people. It's, the fire department, you hear about their job when they're responding to 5-alarm fires. You don't hear about their job when they're doing just rescuing a cat from a tree or something else, a smaller fire. But they're doing their job. They're working all the time in the background just because you don't hear about it. And that's what business continuity, it's working all the time in the background. And then when you need it, you're so glad that you have it. And I would never tell anybody, you're going to be fine. You're going to be better than if you hadn't done anything. Because I would have told people, like, you're going to lose your business. You're going to lose the physical structure. You're going to lose the building. Let's focus on moving everything out of it that's going to keep you making money and going to give you a leg up for when you're starting somewhere new. Just accept that building's going to be gone. Because that's the right thing to tell people. Give them real information. I'm optimistic. And just the value, never mind the actual monetary value of the food bank food, but who they were serving. That cost of inaction, that one thing they didn't do that just seems so obvious to me that they should have done, has cost them on so many levels.
Well, Erika, we're going to have to leave it there. There's so much more to talk about, but in these waning seconds, it's time for you to do a commercial. Tell people how to reach you, tell them about your website, tell them to subscribe to your blog, and then we're going to put up that slide of the book one more time.
Okay, so Erika Andresen, EaaS Consulting, which is my plan software as a service. It's Erika as a service. You get me and my expertise. I'm a veteran. I'm a recovering lawyer. And I am an emergency management professor. I love all this stuff. My website, www.eaasc.com, is a clearinghouse for a lot of stuff. There's links to magazines I've been in, Forbes, Success. I've been on over 30 podcasts, some of them internationally. They're on my website too. There's a link to buy my book off my website. And like Howard said, you could subscribe to my blog where I write something about business continuity that is useful for the everyday person pretty much every week.
And let's get that picture of the book up one more time. It's How Not to Kill Your Business, Grow Your Business in Any Environment, Navigate Volatility, and Successfully Recover When Things Go Wrong. Get this book, read this book, and you will be the wiser for it. Erika, I cannot thank you enough for being with us today, for sharing your personal experiences. And that's going to do it for us for this first installment of Crisis in the First Person. Please click the like button to help support this podcast, and click the subscribe button to receive new installments on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts when we are able to post them. When we have new installments, you'll find out about them. I'm Howard Price, reminding you that challenges become disasters only when you haven't planned for them. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for listening to Crisis in the First Person with Howard Price. Please like and subscribe to our podcast for the latest episodes as we post them. Available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.